Hello.
Hi.
Okay, before we get this video started, I have some really exciting news. We got a new puppy!
Oh my goodness.
Look at
Oh.
her. And she has a little white spot on her chest. She has a little white spot on her chest and some red fur on her belly, which matches her name, which is Dragon. Red fur and Dragon. It's literally, she's the
She
showstopper.
is so cute, and I love that her name is Dragon.
That's perfect. She's adorable.
She'll just be here chilling on my lap for the rest of this video.
She'll be
That's
chilling.
awesome.
I love
Congratulations, guys.
it. Yeah.
We also have this puppy.
Aw,
Biscuity.
Biscuity. Also adorable.
I'm glad that these puppies are going to be, at least listening to our lesson today.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So we'll get started. Today, we will be talking about some ways to make learning from home just a little bit easier, okay? So we know this is all a difficult time for everyone. It's a hard time for teachers. It's a hard time for students. It's a hard time for parents, right? We're all trying to learn from home, and that's an adjustment. So we are going to introduce contracts today. And in this case, it's mostly going to be around behavior contracts and what is expected during the learning hours of the day at home. But we're going to talk about contracts in general and what it is to be a binding document. So before we get started, we're going to start with a few vocabulary words, and I think Madonna has the first two.
So the first vocabulary word is contract. So a contract is a written or spoken agreement. It's important because if someone's fighting over something, like if you have a sibling and you're fighting, you can make a contract with each other to not fight, or to make rules on fighting. I don't know. So just so that you don't fight and you don't have to get your parents into this when they're trying to work. And also is consequences, which is, so if you have a contract, there should be a consequence if you break the contract. So a consequence is it's when you do something and it affects what you do. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I like it. All right, so another important vocabulary word today is mutually decided. And this is when you do something in cooperation with another person. So we know in contracts, either two parties or two entities or two individuals are typically involved. And what happens with that is that when something is mutually decided, those two parties come together in agreement with something to move forward, whether those are the actual terms of the contract, whether it's the consequences that go along with the contract. These things are decided and agreed upon between all of the parties that are involved. So that's what it means to be mutually decided. And our last vocab word for today is a witness. Just like if you ask somebody to witness you playing piano, they're going to be sitting there watching you do it, right? So when you have a witness for a contract, that's a person that's asked to be present at this transaction or at this agreement. And this is going to be so that person can say, yes, that actually did happen. And these were the terms that they agreed upon. And so this witness is going to be able to say that the transaction or the agreement did take place, and it's going to protect all parties that were involved and ensure fairness between anybody involved in this contract.
Very nice. Thank you for those terms, guys. We're going to move to a little bit of a discussion. I've got a few questions for you guys about contracts. My first one's for Karosh. Who are some people who might create a contract and why? Oh, you're muted.
We need to keep count of how many times we accidentally mute ourselves.
Love it.
But like some of those people might be home buyers, like business owners, like people who are looking for a job, teachers, parents, like anyone who might need a contract. And like contracts are just to like make sure both sides of a deal agree, both sides of a party agree. So like an example would be like, let's say I'm job seekers making a contract with their boss. They gotta agree to all the rules they're signing to.
Absolutely. And in that case, they're also agreeing to a set salary, right? That's a document saying, I agree that this payment is fair for what I'm going to produce or make for you, or the job that I'm going to do, right? That's a good example. Thank you, Karosh. All right. The next one is for Mandana. Okay. Why is it important to read an agreement in full? That means skipping no parts before you sign it.
Well, a person should know what they're promising before signing it, or else you might agree on something that you don't think is fair. So say this was my contract and I'm reading this, I'm reading this, I'm reading this. These are all fine. I don't care about these. Yeah, I'm okay with them. But then I read this one and it says, do everything that person says for the rest of your life. I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to agree to that contract because there's just one thing that I don't want to do and I think they can abuse their power on it. That's why it's very important to run through your contract before you agree and sign your contract. So you can tell them, this one isn't fair. I don't agree with this one. So maybe they can change it, or maybe you could just not have the contract be written. So that's why it's really important to run through your contract before you sign it, not after.
Yes.
Then it doesn't matter after you sign it.
Definitely.
That is solid advice. Solid advice. All right, Karosh, why would it be important to ask questions to clarify any terms of the contract before you actually sign it? And you need to unmute again.
Yeah, I think
number
that's
2.
twice for this video in specific. Might be 10th for all the videos. But like let's say there's something you're reading on the contract and you do not understand what it says. Like you just like pass it as if it's just a normal rule. You want to ask questions instead of just going right over it, because in this thing that you don't understand, they could be trying to manipulate you. So you want to make sure you know what they're trying to say with the thing you might not understand in the contract. Because if you don't understand something, it could be something that's against you in a way you didn't want it to be against you.
Absolutely. So this is also where a witness comes in, right? So when it's a kid-to-kid contract, it's really important that that witness is usually going to be somebody of authority, whether that's a parent or maybe it's a teacher, right? They need to be able to help kids distinguish what is fair and what isn't, right? Because they're still in this stage of maybe being a little bit biased towards themselves, which is fair, right? That's just part of being a kid a little bit, right? So having that adult authority is very important. And at the end of the day, that authority is the person that is going to follow through with the contract as well and the consequences. So having the witness be an adult is really important when it's a kid-to-kid contract. So in that case, there would be 3 signatures if there's 2 siblings, right? It'd be kid number 1, kid number 2. She's so cute, I can't even. So kid 1, kid 2, and the witness would all have to sign, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, that a witness is needed.
Yep. And it's also important to note that contracts are meant to be helpful. If we're getting into arguments or we're not understanding and agreeing with each other about the contract, then the contract isn't doing its job. So one thing that we have to remember is that respect is the most important aspect of a contract.
Absolutely. Mandana, did you have a question before I add the next thing?
Well, I had a comment.
Okay.
Contracts are really important, but you don't always want to make so many of them, so you have so many rules to follow. You could forget them and there would be a consequence for that. So say you have made one contract. Okay, that's fine, whatever. You make another contract. That's not great. Like, that's not too great. Then you make another and another. You now have 4 contracts with a bunch of rules on them. You might forget those rules, and then it might end up being a disaster. And you don't want that, because then you might forget the rules, and then there'll be a bunch of consequences that you don't want to do. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you're doing one contract at a time.
I love that. That's a really good point, Mandana, because that even brings me to my next point, right? Is we eventually want to get to a point in our relationships, whether that's with our siblings or with our parents or with our teachers, between teacher and student, that we respect each other enough that we don't even need the contract, right? We just respect each other enough that we will follow the rules because they're spoken aloud and they're understood, right? So contracts are very, very helpful, and I do suggest you use them if you're having any trouble, but you're exactly right. If you make too many contracts, then it's gonna be hard to remember what rules to follow, right? So a contract is an important thing, and it is a binding agreement once you sign it, right? So we make verbal agreements to the people we love all the time, right? So being able to follow through on those things and without a contract is a really important thing too. So that's what you're working up to, okay? So as far as the links below, we have included several different templates with contracts about homework, about homeschooling. You could change it that way, and between different relationships, right? So go ahead and check those out. I am also going to share, just as a quick recap, I'm going to screen share with you real quick some things that we talked about today of the essentials of contracts and what is needed. So let me just pull that up real quick. All right, friends, let me know. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, awesome. All right, so valid contracts include a date. That is very important because you might be able to say, oh, well, that's not valid anymore because it's no longer within the date that I wrote it, or it's expired, right? So the date is very important. It's also really important to use clear language, because if you're writing something and the rule is completely unclear or you don't know how to follow it, then that doesn't really make your contract very valid, right? Next thing is to initial your pages and date the pages if you have more than one page. Luckily, most of our contracts won't be more than one page, but that is the legal way to do it, right? And then also to have a witness. We mentioned that if it's a kid-to-kid contract, that it's really important that a person of authority is the witness. And then a signature from all parties saying that we feel that this is fair and we want to follow through with these rules. And then I added a couple things that aren't needed on all legal contracts, but we're talking more about behavior contracts, so I thought these were important to talk about. The very first thing is that it's completed in fairness. No one person needs to abuse their power, right? This is not like one of those examples that Mandana used. I'm so glad she brought that into our video, but she said, do everything that I ask you all the time, every day for the rest of your life, right? That's an abuse of power. So we need to make sure that if we are a person making a contract, that we are doing it in fairness. We also need to make sure that it's mutually decided on, meaning that both parties feel that the contract is fair. And in this regard, it's fair because we want to make sure that learning is productive. So if we are mutually deciding on that, we're doing it for the benefit of our own learning, right? Because we're all virtually learning right now. Parents are working from home, which means that they need to be able to have their own space to do what they can, as well as students are learning in their own spaces. So siblings need to respect each other and their own learning. But the biggest thing is it always needs to be centered around respect for the other person, right? So keep that in mind when we're creating contracts. Does anyone have anything else they would like to add before we close off the video? Mandana, do you have something?
I don't have anything more to add, no.
Okay, I'm not sure if she's on mute because I see her mouth moving, but I'm not sure. Okay. Mandana, I think you're on mute.
I can hear her in what she's saying. I'm trying to unmute it.
Oh, okay.
Is it still muted?
Oh, you're back.
Okay. Well, I just agree with what Mandy said, because abuse of power is a very important thing in contracts. If you have the upper hand and an abuse of power, you shouldn't use that time. You shouldn't abuse your power if you have the chance to. Just because you can abuse your power doesn't mean you should. It's a very bad idea to abuse your power, and it most likely won't end too well for you because you decided to do something wrong and abuse your power.
Good thinking. Yep, you're absolutely right. Okay, so for those links that you want to check out, they're going to be linked below. Please subscribe to our channel. Say hello and goodbye to Dragon. She's the cutest little puppy in the whole wide world. Bye.
All right. Bye, guys. Have a great day.